Yo, everyone, I'm Jamie and I'm your host on Big House Voices. Today on the show we have my mom, Tiffany, and Jessica. Thank you for being on the show with us. Can you introduce yourself?
My name is Tiffany Mason. I am the health director in Clemtiu. And as Jeannie mentioned, her mother, along with her sibling Jessie.
My name is Jessica Chenery. My family name is Silvies, and the root of Silvies actually is Portuguese. So my Portuguese forefather, Portuguese Joe Silvey, came and was one of I believe, the first Portuguese man to be given citizenship of the newly formed British colony. And he married Chief Capilano's granddaughter, and they had two babies together. And unfortunately, she passed on. It's kind of a bit of conflict in whether it was from tuberculosis or childbirth. And then he married a younger woman from Seychelles named Lucy Quatlima, and that would be my lineage. So from Seychelles, as well as Crocker family from Penelakut. And then my mom is Scottish. And I actually live just outside of Nanaimo, probably kind of in the midst. I guess it was actually probably considered Chemainus territory where I live. And I work at I always find that funny to say this. I work at the BC Centre for Disease Control, and in a world pandemic, that's quite the place to work. For the Indigenous health program there called Chimamuk. And Chimamuk is actually a Chinook jargon word for new work. And I've worked with Chimamuk for, I would think I'm going on about 9 years now.
You're currently working on a project right now. What is it called?
Sacred Circles.
Jessica, what's your role in Sacred Circles?
Oh, so Sacred Circles. Oh, look, I have one of the books here of Sacred Circles with the cool logo design. I want to say Charlene Johnny from Cowichan Tribes designed that. Sacred Circles is actually a family healing project that we started. I don't know, Tiffany, is it probably a year and a half now? It might even be longer than that, 2 years.
Yeah, about 2 years, because I think your first initial visit was about May or so. Not last year, but the year before.
Oh, when we came to Clemtiu.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's been about 2 years. But the interesting thing about Sacred Circles is I don't think our work really started there. Our work actually, and how I know Tiffany actually started, oh my goodness, not very long actually after I started at Chimamuk. I want to say it's been at least 8 years, 8 years.
Yeah, I didn't realize that we'd met like that short after you started working there.
Yeah, I was only a couple years into working with Chimamuk, and I actually had started, so kind of a funny story. I started working there. My work background has always been around community development and food sovereignty. And I had just finished a contract and I seen this job posting. It was called Around the Kitchen Table. And due to the fact that it had kitchen table, I really thought that it would have something to do with food. And so I was like, oh, I'll check out this job posting. And then it was like, project coordinator for Around the Kitchen Table at the BC Centre for Disease Control, sexual health. And I was like, well, sexual health. I thought this would be to do with food. And so I due to that, I actually had closed the job posting, but I left it on my computer desktop. And I did read through the full job description. And there was this part in that job description that kind of hung out with me for days. And so I found myself going back to it. And it said, working with teams of Indigenous women. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting that there was somebody out there who had the foresight to see where kind of like the power lies in bringing teams, particularly from our First Nation communities, together, as opposed to, and the way that I think I had seen work done, where it would be like 1 or 2 individuals, that this was actually a team of 4. So that was kind of what attracted me to the job description. So I decided food, sex, not that far away from one another, and I decided to apply. to the job posting, and ended up getting the job, not necessarily, and recognizing, because I do work at the BC Center for Disease Control. It's pretty focused on HIV, hepatitis C, other potentially well-known sexually transmitted infections. But there was a lot of like sort of cultural content to it. It also attracted me that I would be working with strictly like an Indigenous team, that the team was all people of Indigenous ancestry. And so that's actually how I ended up getting into doing this work. Was I was tricked. I thought it was food, but it wasn't. Due to that, we would bring teams of women together. We would bring them together in Vancouver at that time, and I think our way of working is shifting or changing now. But at that time, teams would apply, and then we would bring 4 or 5 of these teams of women, and we would spend 4 days, like in quite intensive training, specific, in order for the women themselves to go back and facilitate and hold conversations around sexual health in ways that would work for them, knowing that ultimately the teams coming from communities knew best how to hold those conversations.
You just mentioned BC Center of Disease Control. What is it like? What has that been like since this pandemic?
Yeah, boy, it's been a swirl of activity, to be honest. And it's interesting for me because I don't come from that background of working as many of my colleagues do at CDC in regards to being healthcare professionals. Which it's quite something to watch how quickly everybody mobilized to respond, and it shifted everything in within the way that we work. So that meant that some people's jobs literally changed overnight. They were repositioned, or I believe they call it redeployment, to other actual job positions in order to respond. I think for all of us, we're really aware that the information is ever revolving and constantly changing. So you could literally be sort of in a message, handing something out, and within so many hours it can change. Our team in particular have been working on communications, at least a couple of us, just around trying to and it's a work in progress because information changes so quickly, but being Indigenous inclusive as possible in our information, so that what we know and what we hear from folks in community that they need, that hopefully they're able to see some of that information in the documents or the resources we're putting out. But yeah, it's been quite pretty wild, really. I mean, one of the things, like all of the other things that I think all of us are dealing with, is what we're working within at the BC Center for Disease Control. Like, so many of us, I already had worked from home and worked remotely, but it was interesting watching so many other of my colleagues have to now work from home, and we're all trying to figure out Zoom and like cut off on Zoom calls, and yet the people like, your mute button is down in the left-hand corner. Yeah, it's pretty interesting times and days, isn't it?
Yeah. This next question is from my mom. What's your role in Sacred Circles?
Basically, I guess it would be the team lead for a community team. Kind of the administrator, contact person for our team here in the community. And initially it was putting out the invite to community members to attend that first meeting, kind of to gauge where we would go with this whole initiative, and how we can gain community support and insights, and involvement.
What are the benefits of this program, Sacred Circles, and how does it work?
It's evolving as we go along. There's no concrete I guess, expectations of where this is going to go. But we do know that we're working on family wellness and healing, which, with the members that we have being involved in the community the way that they are, specifically or particularly when you invite someone to a session like we did, those tend to be the people that are going to step up and are going to make things happen for the community or within the community. They're the ones that make things happen within the families in order to keep things going. And I don't even recall how the invite went out to our community, but it was in regards to family healing, wellness.
I mean, the interesting thing about Sacred Circles is we kind of came into it without a plan, which has been, unnerving at times. But we selected 2 teams. So we really moved away from doing work in the way that we were, partially because I think at some point we really realized, we knew it, but I think we started to want to really model it and live it, is that our guidance and the magic and the creation doesn't come from our team of folks working at the BC Center for Disease Control. And I should say, there's only 4 of us on the Chimamuk team. Within our work before that, it would literally be our team doing work with communities. We started to, over time, have these ongoing relationships with folks in different communities, and we would have these conversations that sometimes really got to the heart of matters and what was going on. And I think when you look at the roots of Sacred Circles, it really started from our work. A lot of stuff that we're doing today started with our around the kitchen table work, because women would ask us questions. They would be like, what about the men? And I don't think I ever made it through the first day of any around the kitchen table training without some woman going, excuse me. Yeah, we women can come together and talk about sexual health, but what about the men? How are we including the men in these conversations? And sometimes just learning takes time. And it took me a while, I think, to hear the depth of that question. Because it wasn't just, what about the men? Are you doing this work with the men? It was, what about the men? We need you to engage with men around conversations if you're going to engage with women. This isn't just on the women to do this work. So that led us to doing some work with men, and it's really been teams of men. We were fortunate enough to find the Southern Statlium men who were already engaged in some men's health work, and they were our mentors. They continued to be our mentors. We continued to engage with them and share ideas and then try things out. Some of it's successful. Some of it's like, oh, let's not do that again. And so that work, the work with the men truly came from the request from the women. With Sacred Circles, there was a group of, and there was, I would say it was a small handful of women who bravely asked questions, who were like, there's more depth to the conversation than just talking about sexually transmitted infections and cultural content. There have been effects from our history, from the history of colonization on our people today that we need to start having conversations about. And those would be posed in different ways. Sometimes it might come out as sexual abuse. Sometimes it might come out as sexual exploitation or sexual violence. Harder conversations to engage in, fewer people engaging in those conversations, but some very brave women who would bring that forward. Sacred Circles, essentially, I would say, is kind of like some of the fruits or the bearings of those women asking those questions. We're not necessarily going into it specifically talking about, it's just the traumas or maybe um, the history of how we find ourselves today, and how can we dig in together, how can we model in ways together as kind of a big family working together to heal. And what does that look like, which is really why with Sacred Circles we couldn't come into it with a plan, because we don't, as a little team at the BC Center for Disease Control, know what that is. We have to trust much more in the process, not in the end game. So even when we came together as a team, we actually were like, there was that realization after we held many meetings, and some like kind of like more difficult, hard to get through meetings, and I think Jerry, and I do believe you had an interview with Jerry Ullman, and Jerry, as an elder, and Lillian, they really guided us. They were like, to do family healing. And Eugene always mentions what Jerry would say in regards to, like, we have a lot of unhealthy people helping unhealthy people. Y'all have work to do. You yourselves have to work towards being healthy. So then there was like that realization, right? Of like, oh, and what does that mean to us? Like, what does that mean for our team? And then how do we actually connect, like, even as a team? So we ended up having a PHSA Indigenous youth wellness team, which is, how many is there? It's like Naomi, Eugene,
Serene, Gabby,
and Lillian. So 5.
Mm-hmm.
And then Harlan, Amanda, Felicia, Jessica, in regards to Chimamuk. And then we have some outside folks who work with us, Ricardo, who hopefully you'll be interviewing if you haven't already, with the warriors, the young warriors. And then we have our team Reciprocal Consulting, who do sort of like evaluation or storytelling of the work being done. Amanda and Sophia, and more recently Grace. We've done work together, and we ended up having to do work together just to figure out how we were going to act together in a good way as a family, as well as bringing in our teams from Clem2 and Hamalco. And then we just totally decided to do something different in regards to that. In the history of Chimamuk, at least, we've done teams of 4. And so we asked for teams of 8 from both of those communities. So like even the coordination of that, like 8 people, you're flying 8 people out from Clan 2, or we have like potentially 9 people traveling together. I don't know. I don't actually know how many other projects, or if there are ways of stepping together or traveling together if others are doing work in this way. Like, I think it's kind of unique.
Mm-hmm. And it was nice to work with these 2 teams, and how quickly, and I don't know, it might not have felt quickly, but they became a team themselves, between the CDC and PHSA, those 2 teams. And how, when we're like on the ground engaging, until this point, until we're doing the work that we were doing, whether it was Nation to Nation or Sacred Circles, I hadn't necessarily worked or saw a team that was facilitating the work, actively engaging and participating in the work itself. It's a journey together, and we're all at different places in our lives in wellness, and I think it really quickly kind of pushed some of us into realizing where we're at, and kind of evaluating ourselves, and maybe doing some work for ourselves outside of this circle, because of this whole some of the questions that were posed, or and we learned pretty quickly how we can't necessarily do the work that we're doing in a westernized way, like no agenda, no, like, we're gonna be in this session from 9 o'clock till 10. Well, like, if we're gonna have a sharing circle, it's probably gonna take a couple of hours with, what is our 8, 16, 20 something people. I really appreciate the effort, and the active participation from the facilitating teams, because yeah, it's, leading by example is what it comes down to.
Ultimately, we're
Um,
all in it together, right?
Yeah.
When you look at, say, around the kitchen table asking about the men, which developed Encouraging Strong Paths, which is our men's healing group, when we pulled the men together and like totally different, like we would actually have teams of women come together and we'd be like, and we're looking at shifting and changing this now due to the feedback that we get, but we would like be in a hotel on Robson Street, downtown Vancouver, and women never necessarily seemed to complain because there was like shopping and eating and we would do these things, but we seriously actually grabbed this, like we would have a manual that we would go through and it would all be laid out, you could see there'd be like lesson plans in there and all of this, and women would actually go back to their home communities and facilitate these and host these conversations. Some of it, all of it tied to, in many ways, or at least related to sexual health or sexual well-being. When we brought the men together, and like we tried, and they were like, yeah, like we're not gonna like wake up and have coffee and sit in a circle for 3 hours and talk about sexual health. Like the men were like, we don't do that. Like we don't do that at home. We definitely do not want to be in a circle as a group of men and talk about, like, that's just not going to happen. So we were like, oh, and like at first, until we kind of diversified our team, we were a group of women trying to like create something, with the exception of Southern Statlium and their men's team guiding us. So it was very helpful once we had a much more diversified team and doing the work. But the men told us things right off the get-go. I mean, number one, we don't want to sit and talk specifically straight about sexual health. Like that's not going to happen. We need to be on the land and we need to be in movement. And like we can have some of these conversations flow or come in, but they need to be done in a different way. And then the other really interesting thing, and I don't even know, like it started out as a dream, really. The men, there was this conversation. It's kind of one of my favorite stories. One of our facilitators at the time, Michael McCarthy, like we were like 3 days in, I think, of our first training with the men out at Chicama's outdoor school. And he was tired, and I could tell he was tired. And I was like, it's okay, Mike, I'll sit at the fire with the men tonight. Go and rest. You've been doing lots. And so he left, and I was sitting at the fire, and there was a couple of the gentlemen from Old Masset there, and one of them was poking the fire with a stick, and one of them said, "Wood don't burn like it burns at home, hey, Chris?" And then Chris said, "Nope, not like that yellow cedar." And there was a gentleman who was an artist, an amazing carver, and a glatch etching artist from Splatson. And he had his head kind of down like this, and he's a quieter guy, he doesn't say too much, and his head shot up, and he was like, "You burn yellow cedar? That's for carving." And then the Old Masset guys were like, "No, it's lying around on the ground." Like so there was this like hilarious conversation that happened about what is around and like on the territory. And next thing I knew, they were talking about, the Splatson guys were talking about how they were going to bring a truck and a trailer to Old Masset. They were going to get cedar and little tiny baby deer, because of course the deer in Masset are so much smaller than they are in the interior. And it was just, and I just recall that conversation. And that was, I think, the first sort of planting of this seed. And so we would bring back some of because we kind of always try and bring back teams to share with the other teams that we're, newly entering into relationship with. And at the second training, I believe it was, there was conversation about going to each other's territory. And one of the guys from Old Masset said, "You guys should all come to Old Masset, but you got to come in July when it's crab season, so we can dip net for crab." And I remember thinking at the time, like, because I, hold that bigger scope in regards to like, costs of flights, getting the logistics of getting people to Old Bassett. Where would everybody sleep? How would we feed them? But there was this dream that kind of came up at our second Encouraging Strong Past training of we're going to take nations to other nations. We're going to do this. And like Chris was just like, we can do this. We in Old Masset will raise half of the money. And let's do this. And then, I don't know, first, we had this moment in time where we all thought, oh yeah, we could do this. Let's do this. And somehow he sucked us all in to believing this dream of shipping people to Haida Gwaii in July. And that
sounds familiar, Jess.
Hey?
That sounds familiar.
Right? It was like getting sucked totally into it. We'll just do this. We don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know how much it's going to cost. So that's what we call to. And so when Jamie's or Tiffany's referring to nation, that's what is now our nation to nation gathering. And that's exactly what we did. And due to the fact, because, in community and like folks can always get a little bit like, once the women knew we were shipping men to Haida Gwaii for this, they were like, what about us? So we simultaneously, did I say that right?
Simultaneously.
At the exact same time, we had around the kitchen table and teams of women in Old Masset at, I want to say Sarah's Longhouse, and then out at North Beach at Hyelen Longhouse, the men were meeting. And we I think in our first Nation to Nation gathering, we had 12 different communities come together in July. And like the men, when they were out there like some of the men were like, that was weird. I went for a walk in the morning and the water was here. And then I went for the walk in the evening and the water was here. Like there were guys who never spent time at the ocean and they were like, whoa, that was strange, right? There were people who hadn't flown before and I was like, oh my God, in their first flights into Old Masset, right? Hope that goes well. Yeah, it was magical. It was amazing. And so, we didn't come up with that idea. And I think that that's what led, even that nation to nation experience led us to just look at working together in a different way. That we know we don't have the answers. The answers always actually really, they're there. It's just uncovering them or nurturing them or giving them the space or the time that is needed in order to develop further. And they're all within the people within communities. They don't lie in our health institutes, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's where, I really appreciated going to the Nation to Nation this year over in Newhall Mason. Well, jumping back to Sacred Circles, Jessica calls and she's asking me if I wanted to get involved with their team, and they're looking at involving a community. They're looking for a team of 8, and then it just turned into blah 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 because there wasn't a real answer.
You asked me, what will we be doing?
Yeah, and she said a whole lot of nothing. And so I'm like, well, you didn't really answer my question. And I'm thinking in the westernized way of thinking, right? What are the outcomes? How are we going to measure these outcomes? Like where are the measurables? So I'm like, okay, kind of on blind faith. Okay, let's do this. And from, for Sacred Circles, I think it's working really well. And I think, for our communities within our own families, we can do some pretty awesome work within our communities with this being the kind of the start, the stepping stone as we started with Sacred Circles, but with the Nation to Nation and getting, going over there, kind of the same format. One of the lady that I brought over there from here, Michelle, and that whole gathering, the intention, I think these these teams have developed the kinds of relationships with community that there's a really deep trust that what they're doing is meaningful, that folks like myself or Daniel for example will go, and Marie driving like 18 hours to get there, to get to Vancouver, to fly over to Bella Coola because the plane was canceled from Terrace.
We booked him a flight from Vancouver to Bella Coola, but we didn't book him a flight from Vernon or Kelowna and only the night before, like classic, right? He's like, I don't have my flight itinerary to fly. And I'm like frantically looking, and I had missed my flight due to bad weather. So I was like the air traffic controller person in Vancouver. And I'm like frantically looking. I'm like, we didn't book you a flight. And like, he's like, it's okay, I have enough time. And he like drives, he like gets in his truck and drives. Daniel, his team didn't show up. He was like, what, 17?
Yeah.
Just like flies. He's on the plane by himself, no money, no nothing, just flying to Vancouver. And like all the brothers from ESP who were there, they looked after him. Some guys gave him money. Tony, like it was just kind of like you're saying, like that magic of, this is what we're doing. We're all doing what we need to do to get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this kid goes from where, Tofino, right?
Yeah.
And he's flying. Like he gets to the airport, and the team that he was intended to travel with didn't show up. So 17-year-old kid, no money. He has his his own clothes, whatnot. And he's like, okay, do I get off? Do I go? But he knew without a doubt that what was there in Bella Coola was going to be meaningful for him. Before he even got on a plane, his heart was there. He knew, and that's the kind of thing that the kind of work that this is. And it's not something that a psychologist can prescribe. It's not something that a doctor can prescribe. And there's no limit. Going back to Michelle, we're there for the second day, and she was a little bit frazzled because we didn't necessarily have an agenda. I think there was an agenda, but we just weren't handed the expectation of the day. And so she was a little bit frantic about that, and wanting to have a timeline where what to expect for the day. And so she had a chat with Marie and kind of settled a bit, and it's like, okay, let's do this. And then so still on the third day, I think it was, when we were over at the concert that the kids were doing, she's like, I still don't get what we're doing. And I was like, well, and then at this point, some of the young warriors were sitting together and just having this little bromance moment on the bench watching the concert. And Daniel's sitting there, and he's got his arms around his buddies, and I was like, right there. I said, that wellness. I just had an hour-long talk with a colleague of mine, the health director from Newhall, and I was like, we're able to have a little pity party for ourselves, and get to connect and network. That's wellness. We're all kind of taking a break, and some of us, members from the different teams, they had stresses in their lives that they're dealing with, that they were able to take a break from, and just come and break away from those stresses and be involved in some wellness activities, taking care of themselves. And ultimately, at the base of working with families, our own wellness is going to be key to being able to step forward and reach out and to work with families and work with the community.
Jessica, how are you staying healthy in mind, body, and spirit during this time?
Good question. I was going to, what I have set up, I have this, I think I bought it a couple of years ago, a bike desk. Because in my brain, I actually thought that I could like type emails and pedal at the same time. There may be somebody out there who's able to do that. I not do that. So then I would have my bike desk set up, and then I would actually set my feet kind of on the middle realm. And then I realized like I actually had the worst body posture going on ever. So I've since moved it outside, and I decided it was going to be my Zoom location. So I have it set up so then, because I can actually talk and pedal at the same time. So one of the things that I'm doing for wellness is it's raining here right now and it's a little bit cold, but earlier this morning I had a Zoom meeting, and I sit outside and I, as much as possible, on my bike desk, and I pedal for Zoom. Much like many people out there, I have gone to the plants. So I have a whole bunch of little plants starting actually in the window over there. I've been gardening. And then, as I mentioned, like foods sort of is central to my life. So I do spend copious amounts of time cooking. And then I go fishing with my eldest son when I can, just to get outside. And that's really for both his wellness and my wellness, is just to be out there at the water. And, you know, it's a little excitement. It gives you a little lift up if you catch a fish every now and then.
Same question to my mom. How are you staying healthy?
Being involved in the way that I am with the community during this pandemic, one, being the health director, and then also being tasked with being on the EOC for our health department. We fairly quickly learned, we need to take care of ourselves and our mental well-being. So we reached out and got some support from a psychologist that comes on to our Zoom I don't know if it's weekly or every other week. So we do some debriefing with him, get some really, really awesome tools to be able to take care of ourselves, and doing my best to connect with folks. Last night we had a family chat with my aunt and a cousin and my niece. So having and trying to be connected in that way, learning to appreciate those connections in the new way, as opposed to, sitting together or going out when I can and when I have the energy or motivation. It's more about motivation than anything, is going for hikes, walking up to the lake, or mostly up to the lake, because that's where I find the most peace. It's beautiful up there, and quiet and separate away from the community. Not going to get stopped and ask questions or whatever. So yeah, trying to stay connected with some of the folks that help me stay grounded, talking with friends, and of course you guys, my family.
How are you both spending your extra time during this pandemic? Your extra time?
No real extra time. not while working at the BC Center for Disease Control or being a health director.
Yeah, I was pretty busy. I actually, for some reason, I thought that it wouldn't be as busy. Like I kind of convinced myself that, because usually we're planning for trainings. Like we were we were in the midst of preparing for our Encouraging Strong Paths training. We're actually, we're planning on bringing a group of men from Clem 2 to that in June. So I had in my head, and we are such creatures of habit, aren't we? So we get kind of like used to doing things in a certain way. So I actually really did think that it was going to be slow. I don't know why I thought that, but it has been anything but. And then I think even when Tiffany was talking about sacred circles or nation to nation and not having a plan, when you don't have a plan, it kind of is unnerving to people, right? You're like, wait a minute, what are we doing? So it's been a bit of that. In regards to spare, I don't know that I feel like I have tons of spare time. I mean, the truth of the matter is, if I was going to be honest, I could tell you about some of the challenges that I have. Like, what happened to grocery shopping? Because it's not the same. And grocery shopping, oh yeah, and you know what else I've had to uptake? My dog, trimming my hair. But I have yet to be able to do the full job in one sitting. So she's either walking around with her face cut and some of her, or like I'll get two paws and the other ones are, and even when I come towards her, she wants attention. So she's kind of like, baby. And I'm not, yeah. So that's been, and my partner was telling me that he was listening to a radio show and it was talking about some of the most common things that people are talking about in regards to like having anxiety around, and grocery shopping and cutting their dog's hair are two of the top. And I was like, there's others suffering with this. Because I used to love to go food shopping, like, and I'm like big on what foods I put in my body. So I'm like that person who's like, what's in this? Put it back. And now you can't, or avocados, like squish, squish, squish. You can't do that, right? Like I freaking came home with 9 avocados because I'm trying to do a meal plan. 9, which is like a fortune unto itself. And only one of them was actually the right readiness. All the rest of them were like rock hard. You can't just go squeezing things up anymore, right? Yeah, that's what I miss, I guess. My dog groomer and grocery shopping the old way.
What about your nails?
I mean, I have no nails. Thanks for exposing me on that.
Jessica's kind of
my own
known.
bang too. What do you think? This is my bang trim.
Jessica's kind of known for her nails.
Yeah, not anymore.
They can breathe.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you would like to tell your friends or family that I didn't mention?
You know, Jamie, I think just for me, I guess the message that I want to share, and I spend a lot of time thinking about this. This was for me, and I'll use the word, the heart of sacred circles is just love. Like, I think it's so easy to get caught up in our heads. It's so easy to think about things that we should be doing. It's so easy to judge other people without really having a knowledge or an understanding of where they're sitting, where they're coming from. So to me, I just think, stay in the place of love, be kind, be gentle with yourself. I think that whole message, and, I'll often say to my kids, like, I know that in ways it kind of sounds cheesy or flaky, especially coming from your old mom. But if you don't have that love for yourself, or like taking care of yourself, it's really difficult to do that for others. And we're in a time, right, where we need to just take very good care of ourselves. And that when we do that love goes out, and it fills the folks around you. So I just say all about love.
Ditto. Yeah, Jessica said anything that I might have said, I think more with some grace, more grace than I would have.
That was awesome. Thank you for coming onto Big House Voices, and thank you for the work you've been doing for the community. I'd like to give a shout out to VCH Aboriginal Health for the work they're doing. Take part of their #6 Feet of Wellness challenge